everyone, welcome to another episode of Continental Soccer TV, where today we are with Andrei Kanchelskis Jr. We're obviously looking forward to this conversation. Andrei, welcome to Continental Soccer TV. If you look at like the Soviet pioneers of the Soviet era, and I think a lot of people don't know, Andrei, obviously, who are obviously going to watch this episode, where they can actually understand a lot about like the Soviet Union. I always remember, in fact, I looked at a stat recently where Northern Ireland, I think we played them in the time when they were really successful, which was like the 60s, and I remember George Best played against them twice. And he drew one, and so he never scored against the Soviets, not once. One of the best players in the world at that time. And they actually, in the 1960s, they actually won the European Championships in 1960. So in terms of when you're looking at Soviet what would you say in terms of Soviet pioneers that you've seen outside of the guy you just mentioned? Just to elaborate a little bit on that, what would you say is...
In footballing terms, I'll say there's quite a few people out there that were really big pioneers in the sport. I mean, Lev Yashin was the goalkeeper, nicknamed the Spider, was an absolutely phenomenal player. He was the best goalkeeper in the world. Really inspired the Soviet team. You got Vladimir Bosonov, who was a very very player who played over 70 caps for the Soviet Union. Oleg Blokhin, who was another fantastic striker, who kind of had it all really in his game, alongside kind of Sergei Baltacha, the first Soviet player to go into the UK. He moved to Ipswich Town. These guys really portrayed what the Soviet Union was as a football team, and they're all very fantastic players in their own right, and really shaped what the Soviet model is. And that was really good, kind of having a good history of that.
Talking about Sergei Baltacha and the fact that he obviously give us a little bit of background on him, and I know you've spoken to me about that before, just kind of for our audience, just to kind of understand that, to realize how that story actually happened, how the Soviet Union worked at that time, for him being a pioneer, and for you. Just give us a breakdown of that, Andrei.
Well, you have to be in the Soviet system. Is you have to give it your all, for the Soviet team. And Sergei was in a position where he was recognized by a lot of teams outside of the Soviet Union for being a very very good player. And rules back then, before he moved to Ipswich, was that you had to play 100 caps for the Soviet Union for them to allow you to exit the country.
Okay.
And different rules applied for my dad, because the Soviet Union was in a different stage of its development then. But you had the situation where Sergei gave it all to the Soviet team. He played his club football for Dynamo Kiev. He did the most that he could. And when he kind of was getting close to that 100 mark, Ipswich came calling, and the Soviet Union let him move to the UK and create a life in the UK. So he did everything he could. He worked well. He was a strong authoritative figure, a very good defender, and he managed to get into Ipswich Town, albeit he was 30 years old by that time.
What year was that? What year did he?
It was late 80s. It was just a few years before my dad came to Man United in '91. So it kind of then the floodgates, if you will, opened with Sergei leaving. Then you've got a lot of players leaving to Italy, to Spain, and then obviously my father, who left to the UK as well to play for Manchester United. So you had a big kind of exodus, if you will, from the Soviet Union to play football abroad. But that didn't really bother the Soviet team that much, because, as you said, the Soviet team in the 60s won the Euros. In 1988, they were in a final against Holland.
That's right.
I forgot
about that one, actually. Yeah.
And I believe Holland won 2-0. But that Soviet team was very, very strong. And Sergei Baltacha would have been part of that team for sure. Mikhailichenko was there as well, a really, really good, effective midfield player, who my dad said is definitely would be a central midfielder in his perfect 11 if he was to make one. And you've got some really, really good players there who really represented and did it all for the Soviet badge.
Right, and what in terms of because Ipswich at that time, I think they were quite a good cup team, weren't they? They were just known for doing well in cup competitions. They were never really a great league team, I suppose, as you would want to call it. And I suppose if you look at it now, he was in such a great team, that Soviet team, because obviously they got beaten by such a good solo goal by Marco van Basten, who, I mean, so that, I suppose a lot of people don't realize how good the Soviet team actually was. If you really think about it, if you think about them in today's era, do you think that they've become weaker because it's now communism fell and how that has affected the football environment in the former Soviet Union?
I mean, it's a hard one because you kind of look at the Soviet Union structure, and you had a lot of different countries that you can pick from within the Soviet Union that we know today. So you had Russia, obviously, you had Ukraine, Belarus, Latvia, Lithuania, then you had Georgia, then you got the other side in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. So those kind of areas, you have a really big catchment area to find your perfect person to play football. But really, I would say the core of the Soviet Union was Ukraine.
Interesting. Why is that?
Well, you look at the greats. So I mentioned Bessonov, Blokhin, Baltacha, Kanchelskis, if you will. They all came from Ukraine. I mean, the only unbelievable player I'll say from the Soviet Union that really didn't was Lev Yashin. And the others, pretty much, I would say a big proportion of them came from the Ukraine region. And I think that attributes to the fact that you've got Dynamo Kiev, such a superpower in the Soviet era, and people kind of around Dynamo Kiev and in the Ukrainian area were really football mad and really loved their football there. And then you've got other kind of catchment areas like Kharkiv, who my dad went to academy training there, to a bus for 2.5 hours there and back. He went to Kharkiv. Yeah, Lviv is a big area for football, and I would say that was the kind of the region, if you will, for Soviet football. So when it all collapsed, you had a lot of different things going on, a lot of different kind of allegiances, people not knowing what was happening. Then you had CIS, just the Central Independent States, who was a mixture of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus. You just had so much confusion when it all broke up that everything just became fragmented. And Soviet football really suffered, and the image of the Soviet football player, if you will, was lost. Simple as that, and it's a real shame.
Because that's what I noticed when I was looking even at because your dad's Wikipedia, anybody can see this, they can just go onto Google, but it says CIS, then it says Soviet Union, then it says Russia. So he's got 3 countries listed there. So obviously he had went to various tournaments, your dad, and a lot of these players. So what kind of, people can read about it more in Russian Winters. It'll kind of explain it. We don't want to ruin it for people who are going to buy the book. But literally, how would you say that kind of has kind of happened in terms of that whole era and the split? How did that affect the players of that era during the Soviet Union, where it was going to fall between 1988 and 92?
Well, the split was really it really hurt football in its core, really, because all these institutions such as Dynamo Kiev, Spartak Moscow, Dynamo Moscow, if you will, and kind of other teams like that, Shakhtar, were kind of in the mix there. They all had to go into their separate country regional leagues. And then once the Soviet Union broke up, there's a big kind of power grab from Russia as a country. And Russia became the country to strive for because it seemed more developed than other countries when the breakup did happen. And basically, with football players, it was a decision to play where they're geographically from, which football players did do. to kind of go and play for Ukraine if my dad wanted to, or there was a desire for players to play for Russia who then had more money, more infrastructure, better facilities, and they had a better chance to get into tournaments because they were a more established country than, say, Ukraine, Belarus, and all the other Baltic states. So in that situation, most people would have chosen Russia to represent, and my dad chose Russia to represent because of that, because he knew that he wouldn't have entered a major tournament if he would play for Ukraine. I mean, if you look at it, the Ukraine got into their first major tournament in 2006, and in 2007, my dad retired. So the football that he would have gotten internationally would have been consisted of mainly qualifiers and friendlies, and he wouldn't have experienced, for example, the 94 World Cup and the 96 Euros.
Yeah, and also, what did you think of that in terms? What did your dad think of that team when he obviously because did he go to the he went to the 1994 World Cup, or no, he didn't. He didn't actually go to the 94 World Cup.
Theoretically, he experienced it, but he didn't go because there was a lot of emotion involved in it, and you'll read it in Russian Winters if anyone really has the chance who's listening to this. And it's just basically there was a lot of fragmented pieces in the team, and there's a lot of groups that didn't agree with the manager. There's a lot of bickering going on, and ultimately the team that went to the World Cup in '94 was a really weakened team. It wasn't a team that was good enough to progress far in the tournament, because a lot of key players like my dad were missing, and that was a real shame, because that tournament would have been amazing. Going to America, I think it was,
absolutely,
just putting a statement to Americans that the Russians can do it would have been fantastic, but it wasn't meant to be. It wasn't.
In terms of, because I remember when they played, I think they lost to Saudi Arabia, I think, in their first game, and then I think they won a game. It's funny, they lost 3-0 to Saudi Arabia, but I think then they won a game. I think it was like 6-1. It was like 6-1.
And I forget the striker's name, but he was like, I think he was like one of the tournament's top scorer, just because he scored all the goals. And Russia didn't make it to the group. So with that, you kind of see that that's what happened, really. And it's a shame, but these things, with Russia being such an early country after the breakup of the Soviet Union, there was a lot of things going on, and politics was so rife in the country, and there was a lot of things kind of that had to be ironed over before the football team and the national team can start playing, really.
Right, okay. If you're looking at the current state of kind of, I suppose, former Soviet Union, but now kind of Russia, and you're looking at, so for example, where would you say kind of Russian football and Ukrainian football and the major leagues kind of in Eastern Europe really are, for example, the next generation of player? Where would you say it's going to be? What do you think is going to change? What do you think's not good?
Well, it was going back to the previous point. Everybody looked to Russia, and they looked to the Russian league, and the Russian league back then had a lot of money to spare. It had a lot of kind of foreign investment. It had a lot of local investment. That kind of oligarchs came in and did what they wanted with the clubs, and you had people like, not too long ago, Samuel Eto'o playing at a place called Anzhi Mahachkala. So the football there, the money kind of skyrocketed in Russia, but the development of other leagues really didn't happen so progressively, which is a really shame. I mean, the second closest is the Ukrainian league, but the Ukrainian league really has, despite the kind of war problems that happened in recent history, the Ukrainian league was always Dynamo Kiev or Shakhtar Donetsk. So they're kind of, and that's very. And that's very prominent, and that's very much the case in every Eastern European country, maybe apart from Russia, where you get two big teams at the top fighting it out with each other, and the rest of the league is quite weak.
Right.
And that clearly doesn't help the development of young Eastern European players, because they if you don't make it into Dynamo Kiev, or if you don't make it into Shakhtar Donetsk in the Ukrainian league, for example, you're going to have a very hard time to persuade and show other football teams and other kind of people interested in scouts of who you are, because you're going to get beaten by Shakhtar 6-0, or you're going to get beaten by Dynamo Kiev 5-6-0 as well. So you've got that kind of problem coming in. And in Russia, the plain truth of the matter is, Russia's kind of been so spoiled with money in the game, and with Eto earning, what was it, 60 pence a second was the
it was quite a lot. Yeah, I remember it being a very big wage. Yeah, absolutely.
You've got the kind of money over talent mentality in Russia, and it's kind of got a little bit better of recent times, but it's still kind of, Russian players are earning a ridiculous amount of money, and some of them are earning so much money that they don't want to even move out of Russia, because not for lack of kind of wanting better football, but it's just that they've got all what they need. They've got the money to provide for their families. They've got everything they need from the Russian league. So that's really the kind of the problem that we have here.
Like the current. One of the things I want to mention, Andrei, was what kind of was your dad's thought on your what do you think of how the Russian national team did in the World Cup that was held in Russia? What sort of a job you think they did?
Overall, I think they did really, really well. Defied expectations, and it was a team that was consisted mainly of Russian players that played within the Russian league, and very experienced players at that. But you had a couple of players like Denis Cheryshev, for example, who plays for he plays for Valencia, but I think at the time he played for Villarreal. Of that kind of mentality coming in, and I think he was the best player for Russia of that tournament, Denis Cheryshev.
Absolutely, yeah, he was very good.
He stood out more than anyone else. I mean, I know people will say Artyom Zuba, the guy who does the celebration, kind of the salute celebration, the hand on his head. Number 22 was the star of the show, but it was really Denis, and he came in and he scored, and he was playing such great football, and that came from his Spanish upbringing, because he was brought up in Spain. He played for Real Madrid academy, and he really he really put himself on the radar there, and hence why Valencia bought him. But I think the team did really well for that year. But as you can see, there's only a handful of people that left the Russian league because of it. The ones being Alexander Golovin, who went to Monaco, and then you got Cheryshev, who was in Spain anyway, and that's really about it. And the rest of that team kind of sticks to Russian football and still stayed where the money's flowing.
So, do you think the Russian how they kind of did in the World Cup, and I suppose Vladimir Putin obviously running the show there? Do you think he kind of, I mean, especially when they played Croatia, and to see that when they got knocked out in that game, do you think they could have done better, or do you think that they went as far as they could?
I think they overachieved, to be honest with you. Beating Spain on penalties was kind of a stroke of luck, if you will. And they were kind of the way that they kind of got defeated by Croatia. I thought that was the most that they can do. And yeah, from a political standpoint and from the love of the game in Russia, it really boosted everyone's morale about the game. Loads more people started going to CSKA matches. Loads of people started to go to Dynamo Moscow matches, who have a really brilliant, good big stadium in central Moscow. Loads of people kind of went into saying kind of, oh, you know what, we're actually quite decent at football. Let's go and watch our local teams, and let's go watch the Russian Premier League or Division 1, and let's support with all our passion, which is really, really good for the country. So I guess with that's the real big achievement that they've done. They've restarted and rebooted the love of the game from the Russian public, which was very much needed.
What about, and I think, because people always had these things, they thought it was going to be a lot of trouble there, and which it wasn't. It was brilliant. I thought it was a decent World Cup, to be fair. What about, so in terms of, because you were talking just about the younger generation of kind of Eastern European players, obviously kind of among Latvia, Ukraine, Russia, just to kind of educate a lot of people who are kind of up and coming players and players playing in that that you can kind of see that you think are going to be they're going to be big talents.
Well, you've got kind of the situation with Russia, obviously after the World Cup. Players like Golovin moved on. Fyodor Chalov is a target for many big European clubs, which is very helpful. He's a striker who plays for CSKA Moscow. He's in his very early 20s. And then you've got kind of the likes, the kind of ready-made kind of players that are already proving it in their leagues, like Ukrainians, for example, Oleksander Zinchenko doing it for Man City. Absolutely phenomenal talent, very, very good player, gives it his all on the football pitch. Yarmolenko had a kind of had his luck in Germany, Borussia Dortmund, but then he went to West Ham, obviously. Then you've got other players going into Belgian league, for example, from Ukraine. Latvia is an up-and-coming nation. You've got, I know a boy who's gone into Hoffenheim and he's doing well there at the under-17 level. There's a couple of guys that went to Bayern Munich, and they're in the Bayern Munich youth ranks from Latvia, and they're giving more kind of emphasis towards Eastern European players, which is a really good place to be, and that's the kind of mentality there. Because you got to remember the kind of when you look at a Soviet player or you look at a player from Eastern Europe, they're physical specimens. They're strong, they're athletic, they've got determination, they've got a good work rate, they've got kind of the willingness to perform well. And with other nations, you don't see that as much. And right. The only thing you can really do with an Eastern European player is you have a product that's very good physically and is doing really, really well in all those physical attributes. Then you just teach them technique. Then you just have a good coach with them, give them the right direction, tell them what to do positionally, tell them how to handle the ball, tell them how to get into a tackle, and then you're going to have an absolutely phenomenal player on your hands. And I'm very much for that, and I'm very much a believer that you can really get some absolutely fantastic lads from Eastern Europe that will really do you a good job.
So the players, because I know you have mentioned, so the player from Latvia, because obviously my wife, she's Latvian and stuff, so I'm no foreign to that. And obviously I obviously hear Russia 1 TV on quite frequently. So I'm quite familiar, and in terms of Latvia, what do they kind of have coming through that you think, like the kid that's what's the kid's name that's from Latvia? He's just moved to Hoffenheim.
Yeah, the kid's name is Ronald Box, and he's a really good winger. He's a left winger, I believe, and he's just a really, really good talent. Tall, strong, agile. He's got, like I said, he's got all the physical attributes. So I guess the closest kind of big league to look at when you're looking at Latvia is the German league, and right. Seeing what you can do with kind of German scouting and get them involved, and to go into places like Riga, places like Jurmala, which are two big prominent Latvian cities, and just have a look at them and just see what you can get, because I can guarantee you can get some absolutely phenomenal talent there. And same with Ukraine. We can look at Kiev, look at Odessa, look at Lviv, Kharkov. Like, you've got so many good players. Kropivnitsky, which is the renamed city of Kirovograd, where my dad's from. It's got a really, really good, stable young group of young lads that will come through and they will do a good job. And that's really what you can get.
And so, and in terms of, and then in obviously in Russia, there's obviously an up and coming player. I know you've spoken about him. A couple of times. Who you think is obviously going to do well? What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, more. I can tell you more about the academy that has the boy rather than individuals, and I think that's a very good model to do in Eastern Europe. The academy is called Treptanovo. It's in Moscow, and they do football the right way. They're not spoiled by money. They literally try and find literally the best talent they can in the region, in regional places in Russia, and bring them on board to this academy where they provide everything for you, and they play at a good level. They play at such a level that the under-23 team of that academy, which is their main team because they're there to promote youth, they're actually in the first division of Russian football, which is just below the Premier League.
Really?
And that's
so they can actually physically get promoted? Is that right?
Yeah, if all goes well, Chertanovo, they can get into the Premier League with an under-23 squad predominantly.
That's interesting. Okay, wow.
So that's when you do things right. You really kind of have the spoils there. And the boy that's talked about in many papers. He's very young lad, very ambitious, and he's going to be a really good start if he gets to the right place and if he goes to the right areas of Europe and gets the right education he needs.
Okay, so he'll definitely kick on. Why do you think a lot of clubs, when they went to sign? I mean, I remember a few years ago. It was back, and I think his name was Konoplyanka. He played for Schalke, apparently Liverpool. But apparently Liverpool didn't handle negotiations very well when they went to go and sign him from when he was playing in the Ukraine. What are your thoughts on why clubs, when they deal with Eastern European teams, what do you think they need to do differently if they want to have greater success at signing players from Eastern Europe?
I think Eastern European clubs need to kind of reevaluate why that player is that player, and they need to reevaluate what really are their wants and what are the wants from the football player himself. With these situations, it's a question of in any part of football, it's a question of what the money is. There's kind of another example I can give you is Yarmolenko almost went to Everton. And it was one day the price from Dynamo Kiev was 23 million euros. The next day the price was 25 million euros, and the day afterwards it's 27 million euros. And it's really kind of clubs going, well, how much can we squeeze out of football clubs in Europe for this talent that we have? And that strategy, you're really kind of putting the player in turmoil, and you're kind of not giving them the opportunity to go and develop themselves. Where you got to actually look at it this way: what's that 2 million euros going to do for your club? Yes, you can reinvest it into other players, you can reinvest into infrastructure, but at the end of the day, if you can get 23 million for the player and let him play in a league that he wants to play in, then that should be the priority. And unfortunately, clubs in Russia and in Ukraine don't have that as a priority.
Right. Okay. So you would definitely say if you're going to deal with it, where clubs can really look at that market. So you think Eastern European players become more attractive to pretty much Bundesliga, Premier League, and Eredivisie in Holland? You think they're becoming?
Yeah, they're becoming more attractive, and I think the financial landscape of the countries is talking about the problem that I talked about Yarmolenko and the Konoplyanka money. I think now the leagues in Eastern Europe are coming to the situation where they're struggling financially, and they it's kind of like a catch-22 now, if you will, where the player, do we continue, or do we sell the player, or what do we do? If you know what I mean. So I think if you're clever enough from the likes of the Bundesliga, the Eredivisie, and even looking at the Polish league or Serie A, if you knock on the door at the right time, you will pick up some absolutely fantastic, talented players that will do a great job for you, and you can pick them up for relatively cheap compared to other prices that were being quoted 3 or 4 years ago.
Right. Okay. And so whenever you're looking at in terms of Russian Ukrainians, is there a lot of some Ukrainian players that obviously Russian Ukrainian players that you've built good relationships with, that you think how they're actually developing and how their career's gone and what you should do if you're going to make it in the Premier League or in a good league in Western Europe?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I've got a good relationship with Oleksander Zinchenko. who, Man City player and in his own right is, a Premier League winner, and his mentality is one of work rate, and his mentality is one is that you have to work for it. And it sounds very simple, and it sounds like that's what every football player should have. Surely, you just think about it, oh, everybody should work hard to become a good football player. But for him, it was more like work your socks off to make it to the top. And so much so that when he was playing at Ufa, there came out recent stories about him playing for that club. And in Ufa, he stayed at training every day. After training, he stayed. He worked on it for hours. He worked on his technique. He worked on his free kicks. He worked on so many different aspects of play. And it got to the point where the gaffer came out, the manager, and he said, "You can't train any more than you're training now. You have to train with a team, and you got to go get some rest." And he goes, "No. I want to perfect my skills. I want to do more." And it got so bad from management that they started fining him. Every single time he trained extra, he would get a fine. Then they closed the football ground on him, so they closed the training facilities on him. So he said, "Okay, fine. I'm just going to go train in the park." And it's that desire of keep on training, collecting the fines, doesn't matter. I'm just going to keep on training, I'm going to keep on perfecting my skills. And what happened next? I mean, the next is history. And a Manchester City scout found him playing in the Russian league and thought this guy had it to be playing for Manchester City, and he's got something about him. And then lo and behold, he went to Manchester City, and you look a few years later, and he's a Premier League winner. That just shows you what you're getting, and he's a perfect example of how you can really, really work towards your dreams.
Yeah, I mean it's funny because I remember watching him play against Northern Ireland, and he got man of the match. Played against our 21s, and none of the players we have were on his level. He was on just different. He was mesmerizing to watch, to be honest. So obviously, as you kind of if you look at a player like that, and obviously that club that he obviously came from, I suppose it's like to a lot of kids around the world that do want to make it as a professional and being scouted. Because I think some kids actually have a fear, Andrei, of never being scouted. They really do, and I think that. So he had obviously been at a club like Ufa. Had he been at a club before Ufa, or was that the only club he had been with?
Yeah. I mean, he's Ukrainian, so he's kind of did his kind of football education in Ukraine, and during the troubles and everything, Russia and Moscow in particular where he would find refuge really. So he turned out to be in Russia at the time, and he got a trial at Ufa, and then Ufa signed him, and the rest is history. So it just happened to be right place, right time. And Ufa was the team at that time who funny enough, Ufa's very first manager was my dad.
Oh, right.
Andrei Kanchelskis Jr.
That's right, yeah.
And you'll find out more in Russian Winters about how that went down. But it was a team that was going on the up, and it had a good culture of raising young, hungry, driven football players. And they got into the Premier League, and once they got into the Premier League, they became a permanent fixture there, like they are now. And Zinchenko is very much part of it during that time, and that kind of reputation of that team kind of resonated and went across Europe. And that's where scouts like Manchester City scout that found him came over, because he knew that this team had a reputation of having very good young players. So
right, okay. And so how did actually, so obviously your dad obviously went in there, and so obviously he had obviously come in kind of after, but did your dad and him, did they ever have like does he know a lot about your dad's career and what your dad did, and did he have any influence on Zinchenko's career?
I would say so, yeah. And he would openly say it. My dad was kind of the original prototype of what Zinchenko is, if you will, if you put it into the two parallels. And my dad came over from Russia, from Ukraine and Soviet Union, if you will. He came over to England. He went over to a Manchester club. He grafted for 1 or 2 years. Then he got his Premier League medal, and the accolades came rolling down. So that's the same with Zinchenko. You can argue the fact that if you look in a parallel, he went into Russia, he went into a Manchester club, albeit it's a different side of Manchester, but he then worked on it. He worked on his game. He had a couple of seasons, and then he finally got his reward with winning the Premier League medal. So with that, Zinchenko obviously sees that he's kind of followed, if you will, in the footsteps of another player who's done kind of that kind of similar journey. So it was very interesting, and I think, you know, talking to Zina, like, he has immense respect for my dad and what he's done in the game, for sure.
Yeah, and I suppose that's interesting because your dad had coached and he obviously played for them, so that's really, really interesting. So, just kind of talking about, in terms of Russian winters, we've kind of hit on it a few times, Andrei. And what was kind of the story behind Russian? Because you obviously see a lot of professionals, like Roy Keane's come out with loads of books, David Beck, many players, you know. And it's funny, like, what was kind of the story behind Russian winters? And because it's a very unique name, and it really, I followed your dad a lot as a kid, and I obviously I read it. I read the whole book. I read it a few times, and I really got a lot out of it. And what was the reason behind writing Russian Winters?
Yeah, I mean, the reason is that my dad actually has 3 books, 3 biographies / autobiographies. The first one came out with his career at Manchester United. So the first one came out in, I believe, it was '94, and that was just basically a little kind of snippet of how it was like in the Soviet Union to his career till the end of Manchester United, or around there. So that's completely in English, and that still can be found on websites like Amazon.
Really? Okay, I'll have to look out for that. Okay.
But that pretty much stops at the latter years of his Manchester United career. And then you've got another book which was written in 2002, but it was purely Russian. And that was basically my dad's experiences back in the UK to the Russian audience. And that stopped at his time at Southampton, where he went under Gordon Strachan. And that kind of gave a little bit of a nutshell of what it is. And I think Russian Winters is basically the next stage of that development. And it was just to sum up his whole career in football and a little bit of his career in management. And that was the kind of rationale behind making the book. And we kind of felt that the book in English, the Man United book, I think we needed something more with more substance, more meat in it. So that's when we created Russian Winters and the experiences that he wrote there, and it's a good thing to know. I mean, you know, you give the example of Roy Keane making his book, of Peter Crouch having a book, and other football players doing it. It's a really good tool to find out what they're up to, and it's really good to go into the mind of a football player, of what they're thinking during the time that you supported them at the club, or, you know, the time when you saw them in World Cups and Euros. And Russian Winters does give a good insight of that. And even though it kind of gives you snippets of his career, you get a whole good overall kind of outlook from him and his perspective, which is really, really nice. I think it's
absolutely.
Really, really well.
And you get to see Andrei and his sister in the inside of the book as well, because the book is dedicated to them.
Me playing rugby as well. I'll like to say.
Yeah, that's right. The rugby picture. There's actually a picture of that one in there. Funnily enough. Okay, and everyone, like I say, for any comments in the section, you can also just find Continental Aspire Soccer on Instagram, followed by on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And also you can check us out on our website, www.continentalaspiresoccer.com, for this whole episode. So any more questions, leave them in the section below. And Andrei, thank you very much for coming on to the CAS podcast today.